Welcome back, everyone. This is Shields, and today we are going to react to the British Museum is full of stolen artifacts. Now, this is going to be an interesting one, maybe a controversial one. Now, with all controversies, we turn to Vox. This is Vox. Subscribed to them for a while now. They put out interesting stories. They put out different, perspectives on things. Now, the British Museum isn't located in London. There is swabs and swabs of artifacts and antiquities here, pretty much from every culture that has ever existed. We're talking there are Mesopotamia, Indus River Valley, ancient China, obviously Egyptian stuff. That was pretty much the creme de la creme there. There are, all types of antiquities from all over the world. So I'm sure this baseline. So we're gonna take this video with a grain of salt. We're gonna react to it. We're not gonna really form an opinion, but we're just gonna take it all in and kind of see, is it valid? Are they making valid points? So I guess we are gonna make an opinion out of it. Um, I've been there twice. It's very interesting, learning and seeing these things. Of course, their main item there is the Rosetta Stone, and there are different. I know there are the Italians, the Greeks, and the Egyptians. Those three groups specifically have like artifacts that they wish they had in Rome, Athens, or Cairo. However, this is just not how the things worked out. Whether it be an explorer bring it home, whether there be a commission to the monarch, there was a commissioned exploration, and or whether it be even as something as simple as like at one point Britain, Great Britain in the 1800s, the Victorian era, during the colonialism, they may have taken some things. But we're just gonna listen. We're gonna see what the Vox video says, and let's jump into it, shall we?
It's the world's largest world history museum, and it draws millions of visitors every year. Inside, it holds more than 8.
By the way, that the atrium right here is just so cool. You gotta admit, you got like this spiral staircase that wraps each side of this huge circular spherical room, which is like a library. I would say it's like a library right there, and then you have like this dome of glass, and then it's flanked on each side with these what do you call it, like these Greek or Roman archways with columns. It's just the architecture is amazing.
8 million cultural and historical artifacts from all over the world, which cover 2 million years of human history.
2 million years of human history. There may be stuff from like, well, human history, like 300,000 years, 2 million years ago. I guess we're talking Homo erectus and habilis, and that grouping, but I don't remember seeing those. Maybe I missed it. Maybe I saw it and didn't realize it.
If you follow the museum's recommended list of don't miss items, you'll see its star pieces. Like this Easter Island sculpture that's about
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
1,000 years old, or this bronze sculpture of the Hindu god Shiva. But there's a problem hidden in the museum, and we can see an example of it along this route. Out of those 12 pieces, nearly half have disputed ownership. The British Museum claims those
Of course.
pieces belong there, on display for the world to see. But in recent years, many have been fighting to get them back to where they came from.
The list of disputed museum treasures keeps on growing.
Should cultural artifacts return to their home countries or be left in Western museums?
The subject of intense debate as to who should now own them.
Let's start with some context.
Okay, yeah. Let's start with some context. But before we get into the context, let's already have an opinion. So Easter Island, isn't the Eastern Island in the Pacific Ocean, like the middle of the Pacific Ocean? Let me just do my let's do my due diligence real quick. Yeah, it's like off the coast of Chile, right? No one's going to Chile or Easter Island to see the Easter Island head. So we're just going to nip that in the butt right there. So, like, I'm going to go ahead and form an opinion preemptively, which is not really smart to do, but I'm doing it anyway, that some of these artifacts are so spread out in the entire world. This is meant to have a centralized location of human history and excellence. Not to say that Western or Great Britain is above any of these countries. It's more or less utilizing this centralized location, which we've seen before. London can be considered the capital of the world in terms of diversity, culture, and how it's like a melting pot for all of that, and specifically the location as well. It's a good centralized location for humanity to have all of these items located under the same roof for a centralized learning experience. However, I understand strictly when it comes to like stolen goods, stolen treasures. That is an interesting conversation. So let's keep going.
In the late 1600s, the British Empire began expanding across several continents. It became the largest empire in history, controlling about a quarter of the world's land and population. During its centuries-long rule, the empire took precious resources and wealth from countries all over the world.
As did every other European country of power of this time, such as the Dutch, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the French, the Germans. Continue.
Including cultural and historical artifacts, many of which ended up here in the British Museum, which was founded in 1753 and kept growing to accommodate all the new pieces in its collection. Lots of the items in the museum were legally acquired and are completely undisputed, like this one, a 2,000-year-old Roman vase sold to the museum by a duke in 1945. The problem is with the pieces that are disputed, like the first item you see as soon as you walk in.
It's not the first item you see when you walk in, but it's the most prominent exhibit, which is the Rosetta Stone.
The Rosetta Stone, taken by British troops from the French in what is now Egypt.
Okay, so let's keep going before I comment.
Or further in.
Okay, that was it. So the French excavated this while they're in early 1800s when they were it was like the Battle of the Pyramids, right, in Egypt. They excavated it, and then there was a continuous war. Britain and the French, Napoleon and Britain. So, I mean, I don't see a problem with that one, more or less, because the French took it and then they essentially lost it to the British. Continue.
The Parthenon sculptures, removed from the
This is one I can see going back, but let's keep listening.
Acropolis in Athens by a British lord and sent to the British Museum. Or over here, on the floor dedicated to African art, the Benin bronzes, some of the most contentious items in the museum. The Benin bronzes are kind of hard to categorize because they include such a huge range of items, from engraved ivory tusks to brass sculptures to plaques. But they were all produced here, in the Kingdom of Benin, in present-day Nigeria. This wealthy and industrious kingdom produced thousands of objects.
And by the way, Benin's actually a little bit to the left, so there's a migration of the people there. So present-day Nigeria.
And art pieces starting in the 1500s. A lot of the items adorned palace walls and were used for religious rituals, but they weren't just decorative.
There were visual archives of the kingdom in a society that did not develop written script as we know them.
That's Professor Chika Okeke-Agulu, an art historian and professor from Nigeria who teaches at Princeton University.
They told their history, how they narrated the histories of kingship, of the kingdom, its political and social life.
But in 1897, Benin would lose thousands of these cultural pieces. At the time, European colonial powers were expanding south in what was called the Scramble for Africa. They split up the continent into spheres of influence for financial exploitation. All these pink areas were the British ones. Benin, over here, was in Britain's sphere of influence, but the kingdom didn't comply with Britain's trade demands. And in January of 1897, it led to what was called the Benin disaster, where Benin guards killed 7 British emissaries, plus their many guides and servants.
Okay.
In response, 1,200 British troops embarked on a mission called the Benin Punitive Expedition. The British wanted revenge, but the mission was about more than just that.
There were reports of these vast treasures in the palace of the King of Benin, and that if they could retrieve these treasures, sales from it could offset the cost of the invasion. This was all well planned, and so the punitive expedition, in other words, was also an economic enterprise.
The British soldiers, armed with machine guns, conquered the city and burned it to the ground, but not before carefully taking thousands of artifacts. They piled them up neatly, photographed them, and even labeled them loot. This photo, taken at the Benin Palace after the raid, shows soldiers with the dismantled plaques that were brought to the British Museum and sold all over the world. And after hundreds of years, the once prosperous kingdom was gone. The region fell under full British colonial control until 1960, when Nigeria, including the city of Benin, gained independence.
Good.
But even though they were finally free, their historical artifacts were still spread all over the world, locked up in Western institutions like the Leipzig Museum of Ethnology in Germany and the Quai Branly Museum in Paris, and, of course, the British Museum.
1995, in London. That was my first time of seeing an original ancient Benin artwork. Was, yes, at the British Museum. Being in the presence of these magnificent objects and knowing that I had to travel all the way from Nigeria to see for the first time these objects, it was a mixture of pride in the achievement of these ancient artists and anger mixed with a sense of loss at what could have been if I only had to travel a few hundred miles. But at this point, you're limited to those privileged like me who could get a visa to travel all the way from Nigeria to England to encounter these objects. Most Nigerians will never see them.
Interesting though, like is you're speaking about Nigerians. Benin's obviously their own sovereign country, and it's I believe a couple countries over, might be even bordering. I cannot remember, but it's in that little like that little L of Africa. Interesting though, like it's so difficult to like come up with like a commonality here of like what is to do now, because there's a couple ways you can go about this. First off, the perspective is this happened over 130 years ago. The factions that were at large between these two these two countries were Victorian Britain and the Kingdom of Benin. These factions do not exist anymore. There are new modern factions. So the stress of that should not be taken too lightly. But also, let's look at the light side here, the good side. The good side is preservation. So the items were preserved. That we know of, the items have been preserved. So that's a good thing. So now, there's a lot of things that occur in museum life where they have expeditions and they ship things from here to there. I mean, I imagine when there's this much disputing of like where something should be, whether it be, what was it the Athenian statues that we were talking about earlier, as well as the Benin bronze statues here. There should be some sort of partnership at least. I think that's a good common ground here between academia, whether it be universities, and because I think the big thing now is like the factions at large do not exist anymore, so it's so hard to like it's almost like reparations. It's so difficult to have conversations with things that are almost ghost to today. So it's very interesting to see how these factions will play today. But you know, if it was up to me, which I'm not in control of anything, but if it was up to me, I would say like do a partnership where there's a university, whether it be Nigeria or present day Benin, wherever that could be, where there could be some sort of museum uprising within those countries, and we can, you know, safely and securely move these items from A to B. And then there can be further conversations of splitting the treasures between the two countries, because there's no way that Great Britain or London or whoever the faction is in charge of these items, British Museum, because it goes further than British Museum. British Museum is not a private organization. So it's not just going to be like, all right, here you go, here's everything back. No, it's not going to happen. So yeah, it's a difficult one for sure. Let's keep watching.
In March 2000, Benin's royal family tried to change that. They officially requested all cultural property illegally taken be returned to the rightful owner. But for the most part, the British Museum has ignored any requests.
Of course.
The museum is restricted by a government act that prevents it from returning objects. But
wow,
it has also made its stance clear. In July of 2020, the British Museum told Vox, "We don't restitute, but we are absolutely committed to lending as widely as possible, including to Nigeria. The museum's foundational value resides in its breadth, scale, complexity, and unity, and as such is a true library of the world."
I understand that.
Chika doesn't see it that way.
The British Museum still behaves like a colonial museum. You cannot claim to be an encyclopedic collector of stolen objects.
But some are starting to reckon with this history. In 2014, the grandson of this British soldier from the 1897 Benin punitive expedition returned these two items he had inherited to the Benin royal family.
Well, that's cool.
And
but that's the difference here. This is a private citizen, but it's very difficult, especially with Parliament passing that act that we just talked about just a second ago, as well as the British Museum. This is not an individual making a decision. There's like a board of directors. There's Parliament now involved. There is multiple ideologies conflating, and you need unanimity almost in this to make a decision, because there's going to be, it's such an interesting, delicate thing. So like you can't ask for a mile here, even though, you know, you might think that this is 100% rightfully yours. To get where you want to go, you have to have a compromising agreement that so slowly grows over time. So a lending agreement could eventually become a owning agreement, you know, because generations are going to have to pass for things like this to actually go through. So let's keep watching.
And in 2007, the Benin Dialogue Group was formed. Western museums that hold the bronzes and Nigerian government representatives have been discussing potential solutions ever since. But as of today, none of the bronzes have been returned.
And they're not going to be for a while, because, like I said, they're not going to just give it back. Just not how it works, sadly.
But this is just one story. This legacy is bigger than the Benin bronzes. There are hundreds of contested items in the British Museum with their own.
Hey, by the way, the Rosetta Stone is such a difficult conversation, just because of all the factions that have been in that area in Egypt, and like I said, the French and the French and British War that was going. It wasn't called the French and British War, but you know what I'm talking about. The coalitions against there's like 4 or 5 coalitions against Napoleon and the French. So yeah, very difficult conversations.
rich histories, and with a
Australia, you're showing Australia. Australia was under the Commonwealth of the British Empire for the longest time. Technically still is.
original owners trying to retrieve them.
Okay, and ammunition scrolls, China.
But the problem is even bigger than the British.
And also, it's very interesting because ownership is so interesting, right? Now the stolen conversation of like how they received those, they looted the palaces. That's a different conversation. That is like, you literally stole it. However, when you're talking about like Hong Kong, which is China, when you're talking about Australia, which is technically UK, Britain, not technically UK, but you know what I'm talking about. It was technically under the British Empire. At the time, they had control over those people, over that land. So technically, on the legality scale, between certain, parameters, those artifacts and antiquities are owned by the British Empire. Technically. Whether it be by conquest or by legality, technically. And that's just how it goes. Sadly, some of this isn't always the best to hear, but you have to make compromise in this world.
Museum. It's a legacy of centuries of colonial power that repeats itself again and again with different artifacts in different museums, because these requests aren't just about items. They are also about cultural and historical identity and who gets to own it.
This is a long-term project. It may last beyond my own lifetime.
Most likely.
But the point is that it's now to start that process. We cannot wait any longer for a next generation to even begin the necessary task and project of cultural reconstitution.
Okay, that's like I said. I'm gonna make my final thoughts here. First off, not trying to offend anyone, but sometimes you do that. But I look at the bright side of things here. This is, like I said, the amount of millions of people that go here and are educated and learn about, the intricacies of our humanities, of our expansion since the dawn of time. It's just enlightening. It's an enlightening experience. Now, the interesting things about these treasures and how we can utilize different mediums to display learning, it can be discussed, it can be compromised, but this is an institution, not an individual, so it's going to be very hard to move the needle unless you compromise. And that's all I got to say about all of this. If you've never been to the British Museum, no matter how you feel about it, I implore you to go. It's such an interesting experience, especially if you care about history. But yeah, that's all I got today, guys. If you like videos like this, please hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out. Bye-bye.